Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Age Kirchhoff and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today we're talking about my hidden gems for Week 6 of the 2021 fantasy football season. After the snap that occurred on Thursday Night Football, many of us began to realize that prospects were disappearing from our lineups. Guys like Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, and Devontae Smith had disappeared as their contributions were not going to help us based on their entire productivity in Week 6. Then little did we know, players like Chris Carson, Christian McCaffrey, and now even Nick Chubb, and many more are going to be missing from our lineups, along with every single member of the New Orleans Saints, Atlanta Falcons, New York Jets, and San Francisco 49ers. Many of us have rendered ourselves in a very difficult position as our benches are filled with injuries and bye weeks. The snap has definitely made an impact as our entire week is at jeopardy, but it is our job to go ahead and collect the 6 hidden gems for Week 6 of the 2021 fantasy football season with the help of Underdog Fantasy, a superhero in their own right, in order to help us give ourselves an advantage this week with players that are underutilized, under-rostered, and at this current moment in time, often not started in more than 30% of leagues. I'll talk about 6 sleeper options and give you guys my perspective and opinions and the statistics that justify the reasoning as to why they could potentially be played this week if in fact you're in need of help in order to help you win your Week 6 contest. Before we begin today's video, I got to remind you guys to check out Underdog Fantasy because, of course, it's another way to play fantasy football besides helping me collect the 6 hidden gems for this week. Of course, we're going to go ahead and talk about their pick'ems because many of the players that we talk about today will be in that pick'em slip, and we could potentially build one and give you guys my perspective as to which of those specific statistics, whether it is over or under, I am going after. Also, do not forget to use the link down below in the description of the video and use promo code Andrew. With your first deposit of $10 or more, you'll be given an additional $10 in bonus cash. Again, that's promo code Andrew at Underdog Fantasy. Thank you very much. I can't thank you guys enough for supporting the channel, whether it is via Underdog Fantasy or via your viewership. You guys are continuing to help support this community and build it day in and day out as we are approaching our 55,000 subscriber goal. I cannot thank you guys enough. If you have not yet already, we're making fantasy football content, whether it is as wacky as this or not, for the entirety of the 2021 season. Do not forget, tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, we will be live streaming, helping you set your lineups and all of the above. Of course, if you haven't checked out my strength of schedule video from yesterday, it is a great watch to help you kind of determine who has the easiest schedule going forward and how that potentially could help you win a 2021 fantasy football championship, because that's the entire point of this channel. Thank you very much. All right, let's go ahead and let's talk about our 6 hidden gems for the 2021 fantasy football season for Week 6, beginning with the Power Stone. Instead of decimating Xandar, we're going to travel to Chicago in order to collect the Power Stone via Khalil Herbert. Khalil Herbert is currently the starting running back of the Chicago Bears. David Montgomery and Damian Williams will not be playing. Now, what kind of potential does Khalil Herbert have? At this current moment in time, he's coming off of a week in which he had 18 total rushing attempts for 75 yards, 4.2 yards per carry average against the Las Vegas Raiders defense. And when I think about this backfield, and I know that there's no David Montgomery and Damian Williams potentially impeding on his overall potential, I think, wow, there's a lot of opportunity to be had in this backfield via touches. I mean, just looking at the last couple weeks, in Week 5 against the Las Vegas Raiders, the backfield had 34 total rushing attempts and 3 total targets. The week prior, in Week 4, 34 rushing attempts again and 2 total targets. In Week 3, unfortunately, against the Chicago Bears, this entire offense was rendered to nothing. But going back to Week 1 and 2, 24 rushing attempts in Week 1 with 6 targets, 22 rushing attempts in Week 2 with 7 total targets. This team knows how to feed their running backs the ball, whether it is David Montgomery, whether it is Damian Williams, and now Khalil Herbert. And the strongest choices often require the strongest of wills, and I truly do believe playing the Power Stone of Khalil Herbert is going to give us an advantage because of the matchup this upcoming week. This rookie running back out of Virginia Tech, yes, he accomplished a lot in his final season in the NCAA with over 1,100 rushing yards, 8 rushing touchdowns, got himself a good amount of work in the receiving game, but now he takes on the Green Bay Packers, and this is a true test whether or not he's going to be able to succeed. Thus far this season, on average, the Green Bay Packers have given up 78.8 rushing yards per game to opposing running backs. And in terms of fantasy points to opposing running backs this season, they've given up a fair amount. And enough to where if you can potentially see Khalil Herbert produce an average or maybe even the bare minimum of what they've given up to opposing running backs, he'd be a fantastic top 24 running back play. Thus far this season against New Orleans, the backfield there produced 22.4 fantasy points. And then the Detroit Lions the week after, 15. San Francisco 23.5, Pittsburgh 18.1, and Cincinnati Bengals this last week, surprisingly with Samaje Perine and Joe Mixon both scoring touchdowns, 28.8 points against that Green Bay Packers defense. Though they have looked good against running backs this season in comparison to last year, the team is still the same in its entirety. that defense very much so is weak against opposing offenses that steadily run the ball. And a lot of the fact that, of course, Aaron Rodgers is able to maintain a lead and keep that forces opposing offenses to, of course, slow down and not be able to run the ball. I think there's a very good chance that Khalil Herbert is given the opportunity and he delivers on it. If I'm not mistaken, he's wearing Jordan Howard's old number. Either way, that's just something I've realized right now. I think Khalil Herbert is a fantastic play as this week's Power Stone. We move on to our next hidden gem. It is Taylor Heinicke, the quarterback for the Washington football team. I talked about him earlier this week in regards to my top 12 quarterback rankings. I had him as my number 12 quarterback, but mainly because the matchup is incredible, playing against the Kansas City Chiefs as a player that has the sky as the limit, and the ceiling of production that he has this week is to the moon and honestly to the space. And that's why we have him as this week's Space Stone, because again, when you play against the Kansas City Chiefs, this is a defense that has given up 13 touchdowns in the last 4 games to opposing quarterbacks. Again, that's 3 per game to opposing quarterbacks in the last 4 games. So what exactly could we potentially anticipate from Taylor Heinicke, a quarterback that is currently only being started in 19% of leagues, and since week 2 has been the number 12 overall quarterback in fantasy? Well, let's talk about weeks 2, 3, and 4 in terms of his overall productivity. 2 touchdowns against the Giants for 20.04 fantasy points. 3 touchdowns against the Buffalo Bills for 20.38 fantasy points, and 3 touchdowns against the Atlanta Falcons for 27.9 fantasy points. Unfortunately, wasn't able to get much productivity against that New Orleans Saints defense, but I think he'll be able to find success against the Kansas City Chiefs, on top of the fact that he has ran for over 40 yards in each of the last 2 contests. There's a lot of upside with Taylor Heinicke. Of course, this offense has been dealing with a couple injuries. Logan Thomas going down, Curtis Samuel going down. But as long as Terry McLaurin is there, and he will be there, they're just limiting him at practice in order to make sure that they are precautious with the entire situation. Terry McLaurin is going to be balling out. Antonio Gibson. Of course, Ricky Seals-Jones could be a great option this week. You still have Adam Humphries, DeAndre Carter contributing in this offense, and J.D. McKissick that'll all be there to potentially help Taylor Heinicke. He is our Space Stone for this upcoming week. We move on to the Soul Stone, and we always know we have to make a sacrifice in order to collect the Soul Stone via Amon-Ra St. Brown, the wide receiver for the Detroit Lions, a rookie, but one that is potentially going to continue to expand his role in this offense because of the sacrifices made by Quintez Cephas going down with a broken collarbone. He is on the injured reserve, and of course, TJ Hawkinson dealing with a gnarly knee injury that has held him out for the last couple weeks and at least has limited his overall upside based on the amount of targets and the amount of opportunities he's been getting. What did it cost? Everything. And for many of us, it has hurt us that TJ Hawkinson hasn't been playing well, but the ball has definitely been going in the direction of Amon-Ra St. Brown. And I think just off of the last 2 weeks' total targets, it's just going to probably continue. In the last 2 weeks, Khalif Raymond has seen 8 total targets, while TJ Hawkinson has seen 11 total targets, DeAndre Swift with 12, and Amon-Ra St. Brown leading the entire Lions team in the last 2 weeks in terms of targets with 16, which is 8 in each of the last 2 weeks, leading to 6 catches, 70 yards, and 7 catches, 65 yards. Each of those contests, 10 fantasy points in a half PPR scoring format. I've heard it all week long. Jared Goff is looking at Amon-Ra St. Brown and thinking, this is my Cooper Kupp. This is the receiver that is playing in the slot position. In fact, has played 132 of his 150 snaps this season in the slot position, and he is seeing a wide amount of targets. And as long as those targets are there and the opportunities are there, I don't see a possibility in which Amon-Ra St. Brown cannot succeed against the Cincinnati Bengals defense. Of course, just a couple weeks back, we saw Laviska Shenault torch that defense for 9 catches and a boatload of yards. Again, there is a lot of opportunity to be had with a player like Amon-Ra St. Brown. And I think this week, based on the amount of opportunities he has seen in the past and him obviously delivering on said opportunities, he's got a lot of upside as this week's Soul Stone. Moving on to D'Ernest Johnson. The reality stone and the current situation is that Nick Chubb is out. And many of us are going to be struggling there. And many of us are in leagues that potentially are 12, 14, 16 team leagues that there is nobody left available for your running back position, and maybe you're struggling to the point where you just don't have another play. And that's why I wanted to mention D'Ernest Johnson, because he is the next man up in this backfield. And though we've seen him in the past and he hasn't produced much for this Cleveland Browns backfield, the way that he was potentially introduced last season with having 13 carries for 95 yards against that Dallas Cowboys defense when Nick Chubb went down with the injury in 2020, and then the weeks after pretty much disappeared as Kareem Hunt was leading this backfield, we have to take into account that Kareem Hunt was healthy back then. And though Kareem Hunt is probably going to have top 5 running back upside this week once again, we have to take into account he was limited and did not practice Wednesday or Thursday and was limited Friday with a wrist and knee injury. And if this is going to be a backfield that pretty much splits, carries, and snaps between running backs, again, Nick Chubb played 52.13% of the snaps between weeks 1 through 5, and while Kareem Hunt has played 44.43% of the snaps. Again, Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt have only played 17 snaps together on the same field. So if you're going ahead and take this into perspective, this is probably a backfield that is going to switch off with Kareem Hunt and D'Ernest Johnson this weekend, and behind one of the better offensive lines in the National Football League, in an offense that runs the ball between their running backs 29 times per game and targets them 5.2 times per game. My goodness, I think D'Ernest Johnson has got himself a great opportunity. Between Chubb and Hunt, they've combined for 9 total rushing touchdowns, and though those could all go to Kareem Hunt because he's the goal line guy, there's always going to be a possibility that if someone's going to fill in for Nick Chubb and be given ample opportunity, they can deliver on it regardless of whether or not they're playing against the Arizona Cardinals, the Pittsburgh Steelers, or the Detroit Lions. I think D'Ernest Johnson is a possible prospect that if in fact your roster is in desperate need of a running back play, he's a guy that you can go after. He's not a guy that I'm dropping all my players for. He's not a guy that I'm 100% bought in on, but I think he could be a very hidden gem this week that could end up paying dividends. We move on to the next hidden gem for this week. It is Dan Arnold of the Jacksonville Jaguars, and he is currently the time stone because the time stone is something of a factor of dread it, run from it, destiny arrives all the same. And what we've seen from Dan Arnold in the last couple weeks, because again, the factor of time has played a big role in his career as of late, considering he's just been recently traded from the Carolina Panthers to the Jacksonville Jaguars. Time is going to be a huge factor in terms of the chemistry that he builds with Trevor Lawrence in the coming weeks. Last week, he came off a performance in week 5 in which he had 8 total targets, 6 receptions, 64 yards. Just to put it in perspective, 8 targets is a career high for Dan Arnold. He has never seen more opportunities in a singular game in his entire career, going back to New Orleans, the Arizona Cardinals, Carolina Panthers, and now with the Jaguars. He's currently only being rostered in 9% of leagues, which if you go ahead and think about it, he's probably not being started in more than 3% of leagues at this current moment in time. When you look at his performance last week, he had 7.4 fantasy points, but if he doesn't fumble that bar, that's 9.4 fantasy points, on top of the fact that last week, Jacob Hollister on his own team scored a touchdown. Last week, the tight end position for the Jacksonville Jaguars had 10 targets, 8 receptions, 78 yards, and a touchdown. If, in fact, that touchdown goes in the direction of Dan Arnold, we're in a very good spot. And luckily, he has a very advantageous matchup this upcoming week against the Miami Dolphins that have given up 11.3 fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. Thus far this season, New England, their duo of tight ends, 8 catches, 73. Dawson Knox scored a touchdown. Darren Waller, 5 catches, 54. Mo Alley Cox, 3 catches, 42, and 2 touchdowns against this Miami Dolphins defense. And I think there's a lot of potential, mainly if you go back and you look at the early weeks of this offense. Week 1, Trevor Lawrence and the Jacksonville Jaguars targeted their respective tight ends 9 times, 7 catches, 70 yards, and a touchdown. When James O'Shaughnessy was in this lineup, of course, they wanted to utilize him as much as they possibly can, and that's why he saw so many targets early on in the season, of course, until he had that injury that put him on the injured reserve, which is why this team went out and traded for Dan Arnold. Last week was his real outbreak of a week because, again, that Thursday night game against the Cincinnati Bengals, it was a short week. He barely learned the offense, but was still able to play. He's going to be more and more expanded role in this offense, and I think based on the matchup and the factor of time continuing to lend itself to helping Dan Arnold, I think he's a fantastic option going forward in Week 6 of the 2021 fantasy football season. Moving on to the final hidden gem for this week, we're talking about Mecole Hardman of the Kansas City Chiefs as this week's Mind Stone. I'm cursed with knowledge, and I think to myself, well, this Washington football team versus Kansas City Chiefs matchup has to probably be one of the more competitive, higher scoring games on the week. Whether it is the Kansas City Chiefs blowing out the Washington football team or a more of a competitive game as Washington, pushes that Kansas City defense to the limit. Without Chris Jones there, it's going to be tough to, put pressure on a player like Taylor Heinicke. But with that all said, Mecole Hardman is currently only being started in 20% of fantasy leagues. And when I look around the entire landscape and think to myself, well, Mecole Hardman is in an offense that, of course, has Tyreek Hill that did not practice on Wednesday, did not practice on Thursday, was limited on Friday. Well, we have ourselves a potential opportunity here to find a lot of production from Mecole Hardman coming off a week against the Buffalo Bills in which he had 12 targets, the most in his career, 9 receptions, 76 yards, and 12.1 fantasy points. Though Mecole Hardman is a very volatile player, and there's a reason why he is a quote-unquote hidden gem, because a lot of these guys are shots in the dark. I think there's a very good possibility that Mecole Hardman ends up being a huge potential prospect for us this week. In 3 consecutive weeks, the Washington football team have given up 4 or more touchdowns to opposing quarterbacks, whether that be Josh Allen, Matt Ryan, or Jameis Winston in the last 3 consecutive games. I think there's a very good chance that Patrick Mahomes in a 3-2 Kansas City Chiefs team gets back on track in this upcoming week and lights up that Washington football team secondary that looks like a shell of themselves in comparison to last year. I think Mecole Hardman is in a spot where, whether it is 1 catch for 65 yards and a touchdown or a variety of targets, as he has simply out-targeted any other receiving option outside of Travis Kelce and Tyreek Hill in this offense, whether it is Byron Pringle or Demarcus Robinson, Mecole Hardman is playing a lot this season. He's on the field, he's active, and he's getting targets. And I think as we progress, without a Clyde Edwards-Helaire in this backfield, we could even see a little bit of utilization of that jet sweep. Mecole Hardman has a lot of opportunity and upside. Now that we've covered our 6 hidden gems for Week 6 of the 2021 fantasy football season, before we put together the fantasy football gauntlet in order to help us bring back our fantasy lineups, let's go ahead and let's start talking about Underdog Fantasy and put together some pick'em slips. Let's go ahead and hit that up right now. As you can see via the backdrop, we are currently at underdogfantasy.com. Do not forget, go down to the description of the video, click on that link, and use promo code Andrew. With your first deposit of $10 or more, you'll be given an additional $10 in bonus cash. Thank you very much. Again, whether you want to use your potential extra 10 bonus dollars on the London for kerfuffle contest between the Jacksonville Jaguars and Miami Dolphins, drafting your favorite players and team in order to put together a great lineup, or it's the Sunday Battle Royale, or some pick'em slips. That's what I'm going to do right now. Let's go ahead and put together some slips and talk about over-unders at the current position. So what I typically like to do first and foremost is go ahead and talk about the players that I mentioned. Someone like Dan Arnold, someone like where are some of these other guys? Amon-Ra St. Brown. How about Taylor Heinicke? What are his statistics? 271 passing yards total. To be honest, that's a pretty high number. What about completions? I think completions could probably be, you know what, let's just go over on the yard. Let's say he lights it up a little bit here. Let's go ahead and move on and see where are the other options in terms of our hidden gems for this upcoming week. Oh, I think we missed Mecole Hardman because Mecole Hardman. Boom, we'll take the over on that. And if I'm not mistaken, we've got other options here, potentially even Khalil Herbert on the rushing yards. We even have guys like D'Ernest Johnson here with 28.5 total yards, which honestly should probably be an over. But let's go ahead and let's do something like this. Let me just go ahead and scroll up on the screen. As you can see to the very top here, you could very easily put together a hidden gems lineup of players and pretty much surpassing their totals. Now, first and foremost, whether you're tailing my decision making, understand that oftentimes I'm not 100% correct. So go with this, as confidently as you are, but understand that going after 5 players in a singular matchup is extremely difficult, and that's typically probably what I don't want to do. So when I look at this, I think to myself, all right, out of the hidden gems players, who am I most confident in? I'm probably most confident in Amon-Ra St. Brown and Mecole Hardman this week, potentially clearing these numbers, 55.5 yards and 34.5 yards, which they've both done recently, and I think it's very possible. So we'll go ahead and put together a little bit of a hidden gem slip here, $5 to get 3 times my money back if both these players are able to surpass their respective numbers. So let's go ahead and submit this. Confirm, and that is that. The first hidden gem section is done. Now let's talk about the rest of these statistics and things that I've liked and I've kind of pondered over and thought to myself, well, we're probably going to get pretty good numbers here. Laviska Shenault, 3.5 receptions. I understand he's coming off a week with 1 catch, but Laviska Shenault and 3.5 receptions is far too little. Guys, it is a must play there, in my opinion. It's great numbers to have. 3.5 from one of the main targets in this offense. I know we saw a lot of Tavon Austin and Agnew from this offense, and even Dan Arnold. But Laviska Shenault will certainly pass 3.5 receptions, especially with a guy like Xavier Howard out. So with that being taken into account, let's go ahead and scroll down and let's look at some other options here. Certainly, I don't mind potentially Trevor Lawrence rushing yards or completions or something of that extent, but I'm most confident in that Laviska Shenault potential upside there. As for this game between the Cincinnati Bengals and the Miami Dolphins, I mean, we could potentially go under on CJ Uzomah's yards, but I'm not typically an unders person because I always want to think that players can be the best that they possibly could be in any given week. So I don't really like to root against anybody in any sort of capacity. In terms of some of these other stats, Patrick Mahomes over 300 yards. Even though he hasn't done it in the last couple weeks, I honestly think of all the defenses that he could possibly do it against, this is the week to do it. Against a team that is just giving up yards and points to opposing quarterbacks week in and week out. It's a very good opportunity for him in this upcoming week contest. And instead of just looking at straight pick'ems, because I think there's a lot of good options here, and I'm sure that you guys can go ahead and filter through this and find a lot of options you like, I want to go ahead and talk about the head-to-head versus matchups. This tab is called the Rivals tab, as they'll put two players and prospects against one another, and they'll compete under a singular statistic. For example, passing yards between Tua and Lawrence. Who's going to have more if Tua has an additional 6 to start the game? I think that could potentially even lean in the direction of Lawrence. Talking about Myles Gaskin versus James Robinson, who's going to have more rushing yards if in fact we're starting Myles Gaskin with an additional 30 at the start of the game. There are a lot of these statistics that, in my opinion, could end up being some pretty good plays. Like, for example, rushing yards between Carlos Hyde and Trevor Lawrence. These are some random numbers, but hey, if you think that you could potentially predict this at a pretty good capacity, I think you're in line for some pretty good victories here. So let's go ahead and let's look at these up and down the list. So after looking up and down this list, I was able to determine 3 specific head-to-head rival matchups that I like. Specifically, Brandon Cooks against Michael Pittman. Michael Pittman gets a 2-yard receiving advantage, but I think Brandon Cooks, obviously coming off of 2 tough weeks against the Buffalo Bills secondary and the New England Patriots secondary that locked him down, he's a wide receiver that is easily going to potentially be in that conversation of 85 or more receiving yards in this week. And even if he's not, I think he could definitely outproduce Michael Pittman Jr. with other receiving options in that offense kind of taking precedent over the last couple weeks and going into this upcoming week's matchup. On top of that, Jonnu Smith versus Blake Jarwin in receiving yards. I know Jonnu Smith's numbers have been pretty lackluster, 27, 14 this last week, but a 2-yard advantage for Blake Jarwin isn't much considering they're playing against New England, and New England doesn't give up many points to tight ends, while of course Dallas does. And then we talk about Tua coming off of his, of course, rib injury and the injured reserve, playing against Trevor Lawrence. I think Trevor Lawrence will surpass him in total passing yards while just only giving Tua an extra 6 additional passing yards. Just not enough. So I'll go ahead, make my overall bet for this week, and that's it. So these are the pick'em slips that I'm going with. Again, there's a variety of ones that you can go after. Please check it out yourself. Again, that's promo code Andrew with the link down below at underdogfantasy.com. If you use the promo code Andrew with your first deposit of $10 or more, you'll be given an additional $10 in bonus cash in order to have fun via pick'ems or draft contests this weekend. All right, now that we've covered that, let's go ahead and let's talk about the final hidden gems for this given week. Review that, and let's go ahead and snap our rosters back to place. Here we go. Again, these are our 6 hidden gems for week 6 of the 2021 fantasy football season. I want to thank all of you for watching. Do not forget, subscribe to the channel, like the video, and until tomorrow, 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, I appreciate you guys, and I'll see you next time. Peace.